All right, we're going to continue on with the program here. We've got Michael Shuckers has a chat with Elias Collette, who is the Acting Director of Finance, Facilities and Security at the Canadian Intellectual Property Office, where he's worked since 2006. Has a bachelor, master's, and doctoral degrees in economics from Carleton University. Oh, and for the past 4 years, he's been an analytics consultant for the Ottawa Senators. So that's why we got you. Take it away, Mike.
So I want to talk a little about intellectual property. 4 years?
This is my 5th year starting.
5th year?
Yeah.
Awesome. That's great. How's it going?
It's a lot of fun. Yeah, it's a lot of fun, really.
All right, so I guess first thing, sort of talk a little bit about what your role is, and maybe how you got the job. Yeah, you said you've been there for 5 years, so we've covered that. But talk a little bit about what your role is and how you got the job.
All right, I think I'll start with how I got the job. It's kind of it's always funny stories, but it was that wonderful summer of analytics in 2014. I was on parental leave. My wife had just finished her PhD, and I had 9 months of time to do nothing. And I'm a high-energy guy, so it was kind of, what am I going to do now? Like a lot of people in this room, I've spent a lot of time doing stats around fantasy pools, making some fun money that way. And really, you could see about 2005, 6, 7, it started switching. There's a lot more interesting stuff out there. And so I was driving in my car, and Ian Mendez and Sean Simpson were on the radio. They're down at Ribfest and said, talk to analytics. You want to come talk to us? Come on down. And so being an East Coaster, I just went down and said hi. And I asked Ian Mendez, who does analytics for the Ottawa Senators? He says, I don't know, but I know Pierre Dorian, who was AGM at the time, and I had a little spiel. I won't get into it here, but he said, write that up in an email, and I'll send it to Pierre. And 6 weeks later, I get a call from Pierre, and 2 weeks later, I'm sitting in a meeting with them, and the next night, I'm sitting in a game in the press box. About that easy. And lucky.
Yeah, it certainly sounds lucky. That's great. So, talk a little bit about sort of what are the things you do day to day? How much are you doing? How much is that is sort of short term versus long term? Just a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I mean, Scott said it already, so my day-to-day isn't actually with the team. So really, when I went in and gave the presentation, I pitched kind of 4 different things that were going on. And some of them they were interested in and some sort of less interested in. And what they, Wowie was something they hadn't seen. So they kind of thought that was cool. I said, with or without you, I'm sure most of you people know that. And so, we kind of got into, okay, what could be done with the coaches and the on-ice stuff? And so it kind of grew from there. One of the biggest surprises I had when I went got to know the team and the people in hockey ops at the time was the amount of actually data collection and really good data collection that was going on and how much care and attention went to it. Back to Jacques Martin, 20 years of data collection, Roger Nielsen coming in, and I heard about a lot of arguments about what a scoring chance was and wasn't. Tim Pattison, who was the video coach under Brian Murray in 2007, held that post until the last crew came in and then moved into hockey ops, and he's my connection with the office on a regular basis, but he's been tracking it for 11 plus years. So one of the big things people care about in data is objectivity. And so there's a beyond scoring chances, and I won't share it, but there's a number of other stats that they collect in-house. And so what I brought to them was, advanced mathematical techniques to look at it differently, but also how to take all of their data and put it into a report. And so, I've got some software, a private, website where they send text files, I load it up. The algorithms are all in the background. It spits out reports to them every single game. We do some rolling reports, and at certain intervals, we do some special reports. So it's really connected to the coaches, and I'd say that'd be 80-90% of my time. And then I do get the ad hocs, kind of like, what about this? What about that? What do you think? Just to avoid any future stuff. I'm not part of trades. So there's a lot of knowledge in-house, so I'm not part of that side of it, but there are some questions sometimes about, players over time, or, the hot hand on the goalie was an interesting one. Brian Murray was a really neat guy to be around. I mean, obviously it's sad what happened there, but my first presentation, actually, I'll tell us a little story. So this, I'm in this room, it's a boardroom, and there's a screen behind me, and I'm flipping through my charts, and there's 3 guys from hockey ops in there, and for whatever reason, the coffee machine's actually behind me, right? And the door's over there. So Brian walks behind, and Here and there at the other end of the table, and he gets right behind me, he goes, whispers, by the way, I'm a traditional guy. It's like, so I'm a comfortable guy in my own skin. I look over and get, well, so am I. And he kind of looked at me, and I said, well, I'm kind of hoping we can marry this data with the eye test, and he kind of chuckled and walked out. But after that, he did actually approach me a few times on just kind of neat little things, kind of curious questions about people over time and performance and stuff like that, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, no, that's a great story. We heard a little bit about your background in economics. How do you think that fits well with the sort of things that you do?
So most of my PhD is in economics, but we're at the point now at the Intellectual Property Office, so I'm in that sort of CFO, Director of Finance role right now, but substantively I've been the Chief Economist there I started the position in 2006 and built it up multiple levels. But one of the big things we do now is IP analytics, which is a lot like hockey analytics, because what we're looking at there is innovation. You're looking at patents, you're looking at firms, universities, collaborations, scientists, who's working with who, and trying to drive even citation data on patents driving value. So there's a lot of different, we'll call it network analysis, where you can actually derive value to certain things and try to attribute it to either a firm, a scientist, an individual innovation, and then using market data to say what is the dollar sign on that. Without going into too much detail, I think people can kind of get the connection here of what you can do if your mind's already in that space. So it's been kind of fun because that stuff we started around 2010, and so I had a pretty solid base going in that direction, which was getting out of the more traditional regression stuff, which I still do. We have two shops. We do IP analytics and we do strict economic research. So I think coming into the hockey world with kind of a great sense of the mathematics that are necessary, and also I'm a very competitive guy. I never got to play hockey as a kid. We didn't have a TV when I was a kid, so hockey wasn't really in the cards, but I ended up playing football, ended up playing actually CIS rugby, thankfully not when my club was playing, because Western always killed us. But anyway, so it was really, I'm a very competitive person, so it was, nice to bring that sort of perspective, but I think the work stuff is really about those network analysis and stuff like that.
Yeah, so I guess you took away my next question, which is to talk about your sports background. Thanks
Sorry,
for
you
doing
shared
that.
those with me, that's my bad.
Yeah, no. I guess then, how did you get into analytics? So before the Senators and your interest there, talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I think it goes back to the old hockey pools, baseball pools, football pools. I was one of those people who spent a lot of time doing stats before the websites did it for us. I was the guy who orchestrated the deal in my pool where I got Ovechkin for Brindamore because we cared about face-offs. And I made the case that to the guy I traded him to, that you're going to come second in face-offs. I've already won that category. You're very far ahead in goals, and this is going to work for both of us. Of course, the league commissioner said, call foul. So I sent him the emails that showed the explanation. But yeah, I mean, just as a kid, you start with your hockey cards, right? You're there playing hockey table. You're writing your stats on the side. I mean, this is the kind of guys that I grew up. We did these kind of funny things where we keep our own stats around tabletop hockey. So once the technology caught up, and I'm a bit older, I graduated high school in '91, so computers weren't even really my high school. So the fact that you get this sort of experience, and I believe in lifelong learning. I think it's one of the sort of paths to happiness for me is to always be learning. And I think just seeing the technology to be able to do more and more quickly, we'll say, I think, so that's where I really got into getting excited and even doing my PhD and seeing where the technology was going and what I could do with stats packages in the last 10 years versus the first 10 years, oh my God, as you know, right? Yeah. So seeing that power and then having the opportunity at work, and so the hockey side just naturally, the community is great. I mean, there's so much information out there. I got so much help from the people in the community just by reading their stuff, and so I think the interest really is, I don't know how to say it. You like math, you like hockey, the rest of it just kind of comes into place unless you're hiding in your basement.
Yeah. So let me follow on what you were saying there. Talk about your view of where the community is broadly. We had some discussion, certainly on Twitter, maybe about a month ago, right, that hockey analytics was somewhat stagnant. And so maybe talk about your view on that.
Well, I think everybody's waiting for tracking data. I think that's going to be the next sort of quantum leap, if you will, in analytics, that accessible tracking data that everybody can have. As far as stagnated, it's kind of tricky because what's happening is some of the very best people in the field are being hired by teams and going inside and aren't really growing the field of knowledge outside. So if you think about academics more generally, this doesn't really happen very often. In any field, the frontier is always being published. By taking these sites off the market, taking these brains off the market, then it's natural that it might slow down a little bit the frontier, and people are pushing into the space. It's moving, but I can see, my intuition tells me that there's probably the reason why it's slowing a little bit. Like there's things I've done with the team that I know I haven't seen yet out there. I'm not going to talk about them, but I know that in other teams there's other similar things going on. So I think it's kind of natural, and as we get to the next wave, so what we're seeing now is students who spend their entire graduate studies studying this stuff are going into university thinking about this, right? I don't think the cohort that's out there now necessarily thought coming in, this is where you would end up. So, you know, I think it's kind of an oddity in sports analytics that the brightest minds slip away, and you lose that sort of push in the frontier. And I think that might be a part of it. And then some of it's the debates. I mean, if you're watching from afar, from me, for example, you know, watching on Twitter, I mean, I've been in academic debates. I know what it's like. It can get heated. That's all interesting. You know, I've been in some interesting heated conversations inside the team about, you know, what a scoring chance is or isn't, or this kind of thing. But sometimes it feels like a little out of hand outside, so I don't know if that helps the field or not for people who might want to even consider coming and playing. Because if you're new to the field and you want to hop in there and learn something, that might not make you feel good if you've worried someone's going to make you feel stupid for talking about something. I don't know. I think there's something to that, but that's just me.
Sure. Do you think so? Michael Zolt in the previous panel, you know, was talking now that we have just lots and lots of outlets and lots of people. Do you think that creates extra noise and that you get some quality ideas that aren't getting attention that they might have gotten 2-3 years ago when there were fewer people?
Yeah, I can see that. I can see that's potential. One of the things that I find very interesting is so Stefan Mulejo is not here, but he's on Twitter a lot. But he does some very interesting stuff on like kind of the psychology aspect of it. He actually works for the Department of National Defense. He's a PhD in psychology about resilience and cognitive fatigue. And kind of, you know, at the end of the day, the toughest thing with all the data we have, the reality is we don't know the context very well. And as you get to the pros, that context is very heavily guarded for obvious reasons. So his work I thought is interesting, and I'd be very curious to see where that goes next, right? Like mental health, like the Robin Leonard piece was just moving to read, right? The sad story about Ray Emery. I mean, Borowiecki last year taking some time, right? Like this, the idea that people making lots of money somehow are ambivalent to sort of outside pressure, right? So I think the work that he was doing, I'd really like to see more work in that space. The Ottawa U, I thought was Danica, I thought was interesting, right? And seeing an attention to that, I think would be helpful. I don't know how much he could do in the pro levels, simply because of, you know, the secrecy there. But overall, I'd like to see that integration of trying to track intangibles, what we don't know. And if you guys want to get a little bit nerdy for a second, in economics, we talk about, you know, total factor productivity. So we take the components of GDP we know, and what's left over, which we can't explain, we give it a name. You know, in analytics, when we do it in hockey, like, what is that unexplained amount? And can we use some metrics of intangibles, some metrics of resilience or cognitive fatigue or whatever it is about players that we do know, just do some tests and experiments, can we learn more? You know, maybe that's some of the subjective decisions that a coach might make. Might be, hey, you know what, that person is down today, I know they're down, or maybe they're a bit sick, we don't know, but I'm going to play them down the lineup, and sometimes the community will rail on a coach because somebody plays on the third line. And I think I had a good chat with somebody here, and he was talking about Ken Hitchcock used to do that with Steen, would move him around the lineup. David Johnson was just saying, you know, he'd move him around the lineup because he could get a line going. But sometimes people would interpret that as, you know, doghouse or this kind of stuff.
Sure.
So I think really, that's for me, getting into the intangibles and trying to bring more of that. I know it's hard on the pro level, but maybe outside the pro level, trying to understand that more, and then people could extrapolate into the pros.
I guess that's one area where you want to see some work.
Mm-hmm.
There's some other areas you think that the community, you know, you'd like to see grow?
I think that would be the main one, but I also like the debate around war. I like it when it's the most polite possible, but I think it's very interesting. It's a lot like, again, I'm going to keep making these analogies to economics. We have GDP. So GDP sounds like, okay, you have GDP growth, so that's a good thing. Well, is it? If you're a small country who had a natural disaster, your GDP goes up. Doesn't mean that's good for you, right? So, you know, trying to unbundle that's what we do in my field. You know, more work on the war space I think would be excellent. I think that you guys talked about descriptive predictive. I think that's amazing. And somebody made the comment maybe separating that out early on so that the debate gets a little less heated. But I think the idea that they're just tossed out of hand just seems silly to me. So I think, somehow buttressing the base argument so that we're not throwing those away anymore and we start understanding the importance of them, because I think they're going to be the most interesting things in the long run, because you think about the other sports, that wins above replacement is what people are interested in.
Yeah. Let's see. I want to turn it over to the audience here in a couple minutes, but maybe I'll ask you one or two more. So advice that things you wish you knew when you first started? That you know now, obviously.
I'd say the biggest thing is that it's way different than you think it's going to be when you go in there. Like I said, there's way more data than I thought. It's not quite like BU. I wasn't invited in the coaches' room right away to have a conversation, so there's a lot of patience to it. I think that's the biggest thing. It was different than I expected. In terms of there was way more going on inside. Whatever you do, don't ever question who's on the ice based on NHL data with a hockey ops or a coaching staff. They're always right. I did that 3 times. I see Tim chuckling up there. I never did it again. So we know that happens in the data, but really it's just go there to learn. There's so much, again, you look at the public debate around the eye test and analytics, and what I said to Brian is I'd like to see these things come together, because these people know hockey. They really know hockey. And there's some stuff you're not going to get in the data. There's so much chance to learn. I remember talking to Pierre one time and asking if I could, spend more time in the GM's box. He's, a couple times a year I get to go up there. And he kind of asked me, well, why? I said, what do you get out of it? And I said, well, I've got a PhD in economics. So if I'm looking at a data set, or I see something happening, and it's something weird, I have a good idea what's going on in there, and so I can sort of unbundle that myself. But I haven't been inside of hockey for 25, 30 years. So when I see something weird in the data, and I'm sitting at home, because I'm a consultant, so I'm not there, boots on the ground every single day, I've got to it doesn't always jump at me what's actually happening. And sometimes it's things that are outside of the model. And I think that, just listening, a lot of learning would be what I experienced, but going in, I didn't necessarily know what it was going to be like. So it was different than I expected. More data, more engagement than I expected, but a bit of a long trust road, I think is an important consideration.
Nice. Last one for you, and then you'll stick around and take some questions?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So what advice would you have for somebody wanting to follow your path into sort of analytics consulting or working with a team?
Take some parental leave and have lots of free time. No, I think, the previous panel I thought was wonderful, so kudos to all 3 panel participants. Really, it's about wanting to work hard. I finished my PhD part-time while working for the government full-time. As I mentioned before, I didn't come from much. I borrowed $70,000+ to get my education. So I don't take much lightly in my life, but I like to work hard. So people told me, you can't do that. You can't finish your PhD part-time. I did. People said, well, you're never going to get a chance to work with the Ottawa Senators, when I told people I was going to go in there and talk to them. Well, guess what I did? You got to work hard, though. You got to be prepared to work hard, and you got to be prepared to listen. Really, really listen to what's going on. It's new to a lot of people inside of hockey, not as much anymore, but it was. And I don't think it's fair to expect people just to change overnight. And it's important to learn how to communicate. And that's something I've been fortunate, because I've had some of the positions I've had in government to brief upwards to parliamentary committees on data around intellectual property and stuff like that. My office is the resident center of expertise of all of government on intellectual property. So I've had some visibility and opportunity to speak to elected officials who don't know anything about it, right? So there's a way to communicate things that I think is helpful to try to keep people with you. You don't lose them, because sometimes if they're a little on their heels already, and you're all very smart people, they're very smart too, just not necessarily in mathematics. And if you put them on their heels, it might not go the way you want. So I would say really focus on communications and just be ready to work. There's a lot of late nights, I'll tell you. Everyone's going to ask about Game 7. I'm sitting on the end of my couch. I see Kunis come around before the shot. And I looked at my wife and I said, well, I won't say what I said because we're being taped. And she's like, why? I'm like, they're changing behind us. So, you can tell 10, 12 seconds ahead. That probably came from being around the hockey team for 4 years, being able to see that right away and what's going to happen. But I was so stressed on 2 ways. One, because If we score, I'm up till 4 or 5 in the morning, and then back up to get to my day job at 7 in the morning, right? You got to be ready to work. And I'm outside the industry, but I promise you, the people on the inside, the hours are incredible. And it is different than you think. These are all really good people. I had the opportunity to golf with Pierre Dorian earlier this summer. Spent 4.5 hours in the golf cart with the guy. He's a nice gentleman. I mean, honestly, and I don't ask him questions, obviously, because he wants to take a break too, right? But from top to bottom, they're good people, and I think that it's a tough business to be in, so that's another thing. You got to have some resilience. You got to be ready for that.
Good. Well, I'm going to follow. Oh, Mr. Cullen, you want to do that, please? I was going to follow the Cullen model, but
You could each pick a side,
what would be better? Oh yeah, we'll do that.
We could optimize this problem right away.
And yours is better. It's true.
It's a bit of a hypothetical question, but there's a trend of analytics people that are taking management positions, and I know the Ottawa Senators have a vacant assistant general manager position. If that position was offered to you, would you leave your current full-time job?
Yes. In an absolute second. But to be fair, Matt Bradley's a scout for the Washington Capitals, and this is my chance to do the Rob Volman book plug. We have kind of a funny relationship where we like to chirp each other once in a while, and so second last game of the season, he pulls out of his briefcase Rob Volman's book and shows it to me. And he says, now I got to learn some math. And I said, no, Matt, I think you're going to have to learn how to read first. But more seriously, he texted me that same question. So are you interviewing? LOL kind of thing. The reality is that I know the Ottawa Senators well. I know our division opponents very well. I know our conference opponents pretty good. But the guy who's going to take that job has to know 1,000 players. So, if I wasn't spending the last 5 years doing what I do in intellectual property, building up all those relationships and knowing all those companies and all those leading scientists and all the things I do there, if I had the time, even though I put a lot of time into this, so honestly, I'd love to have the job, but that's not anywhere where I'm near to yet. And maybe later in my life, 15 years down the road, if I'm around hockey long enough, I'd love to have an opportunity like that, but that's a long ways away from me, but thanks though.
So, thanks for the talk. It's good.
You're welcome.
What tools do you use right now to do your analytics, and which ones would you really like to get your hands on?
Come again?
What tools do you use to do your analytics?
We build our own.
And then the question was, what would you like if you had a
I like what I built. Python, Mongo, Unix, that kind of stuff with some math that I'll call proprietary. Oh, sorry, I should mention tracking data would be wonderful. But that's not really a tool, that's just another data source. But that would be I'm very excited about the possibilities of that.
Just kind of a question about where you get your direction. What percentage of your work is answering questions that coaching staff or management have versus your own independent work and bringing stuff to people and saying, I saw this looks interesting. Are you just there as a tool, or do you get to get some of your own?
I like to think I'm not a tool, but that's all right. More seriously, no, that's a great point. I mean, basically, I'd seen what was going on in the community. Honestly, Sean Tierney, Micah, Dave Johnson, I already mentioned Stefan Buzejo, Carolyn Wilkes, Ryan Stimson, Garrett Hole. These are all people I've talked to over the years. I've had some original ideas, and then there's so much good stuff out there. So when I see an opportunity to fit it, I definitely take the chance to show them something. So I think there was a comment made about red blurs. Anyway, blobs, yeah. So there was a curiosity about heat maps. So I showed them. It's nice now in some ways because there's so much out there that it's very easy. Once you move up the learning curve, it's easier and easier to explain things. But yeah, I took an opportunity, maybe a slight risk, on a road trip in passing with Guy Boucher to mention the concept of WOWI. And he was interested, and I spend most of my time talking to Crawford and Rob Cookson as far as the coaches go, but that was something that became more built into what we do. So I definitely I'm a proactive person, so when I think there's an opportunity, I'll present it. But again, you have to be careful how you do it, and pick the timing and that kind of thing.
Club bell development and what kind of other initiatives the Sens might be looking at to have a more millennial experience, like the Jays Fan Tech?
Yeah, so fair question, and actually going back to this other question about working for the team. I know Brian McDonald spent time working on both sides, hockey operations on the business side. I think my background would make sense if I ended up working with the team to play on that side, but no, not at all. I mean, pretty much everything is working with the coaches. And Tim Pattison from hockey operations, and that's pretty much it. As far as so I'm not involved in any of that other side. But as an economist, as the CFO of a $150 million operation, 1,000 employees, I'd be very curious to see how that all plays out. But
first of all, thanks for doing this.
You're welcome.
My question goes back to your point where you said of learning from the hockey ops and learning from the scouts and keeping your eyes open. I was hoping you could expand on that a little bit and maybe give us an example of something or some things that you came across and learned from the hockey ops department that you didn't think of to put in your models or have struggled to put in your models.
Okay, so I'll tell you kind of a bit of an interesting story. Obviously, I can't give up too much on that front, but one of the hardest things in being in hockey is obviously when people come and go. So when the previous coaches went and the new coaches came, I didn't know how that was going to go. So before, I had an opportunity to get into a boardroom and present to a group. So I walk in the door and Mark Crawford says to me, "Okay, Elias, nice for you to come, but sit over here for 10, 15 minutes and Rob Cookson's going to come down and tell you what we do. And you can speak after that." So I was like, okay, a little on my heels. I'm like, okay, this is different. I think it was the second or third sentence in. Rob Cookson uses the word weighted metric. I was like, this is going to be cool. 15 minutes later, he'd covered 3/4 of my presentation. I didn't, and we were kind of up and running from there. I think, it's not necessarily on the data side, like learning how they collect data, sitting in a room and seeing it, the debates about, again, I can't give away the other data streams we collect, but they're probably, as you can imagine, so I won't say them, but just seeing how they get and to choose what is event A or B compared to what's going on in the public is, how it's different and why that difference matters, and then making it possible. I guess one of the biggest things for us is, I'm working with the Ottawa Senators data, and we have data on our opponents to some extent, but trying to find ways to correlate some of our data against the outside data so that I can bring in a bigger picture, and that's a bit of part of that proactive thing, right? So if we measure event A, I just want to give it away, and the outside world has A, how well is that correlated, and can we use that data to help inform some of the other sides of the business or of hockey operations? I can't go much more detailed than that, but as far as the complexity and integrating in our models, we do the same thing. I scrape NHL.com and just give you a sense, these reports are 8-9 pages long. I mean, there is an appetite that there was before I got there that people didn't think necessarily was there, just because Ottawa was on the bottom of a list of the most analytic hockey teams in the league, but nobody really had a sense because they are very secretive about this kind of stuff, and rightfully so.
Quick question.
Sorry.
No worries. How did working closer with the coaching staff and with the front office maybe change your perspective when it came to roster construction or player evaluations or anything that maybe from the outside looking in you didn't take into account before being a bit closer to the situation?
Yeah, I think I'll go back to the earlier comment that it's what's actually happening that the public can't know about. So somebody could be sick. This is a good example. So I broke my foot, so I finally learned to play hockey as an adult. I'll plug my team, Spartans HC, 10 years, 2 cups. But anyway, I broke my ankle, and maybe I'll do that funny story at the rink where I fell down at the upstairs in the Ottawa Senators building. But anyway, so I got to get some physio through the team, and again, really great people all around, right? They're like, hey, go see this guy, he's great, all this kind of stuff. So he made a comment to me. He said, you know what? when you look at the leaderboard at the end of the season, who the points leaders are, right? There's some names that are always there, but some names are like, how did that happen? And or what did happen the next year to that guy? And a lot of times it could be like a nagging shoulder injury or a wrist. I mean, Bobby Ryan's an obvious one with his hand, right? Because we all know about it. There's lots we don't know about. And this could happen all year long. People can fight things in there. So when you're in and you see and you know some of the stuff, I'm not in the coach's room, but you get a sense of somebody might be banged up a little bit, but it won't get out. You know what I mean? So you start understanding why decisions are being made. And then also when they're asking some very interesting analytics questions and then you do what they ask and you're like, oh, I wouldn't have suspected that. Now I see why you're making that choice. So I've done some stuff, again, I won't share here, but that's different than anything I've seen on the outside, and it confirmed things, whereas on the outside, some of this community was kind of railing on the coaches at the time about some decisions, but if you dug a bit deeper in a different way, but being asked to do it, it was like, okay, I wouldn't have thought of that question maybe. And when we did it, it made sense. And like I said before, honestly, they're right more often than wrong, like to the 90-some%, right? So learn.
Hey, Elias, just a quick question. You mentioned that you're working exclusively with the coaches, essentially. I'm just wondering, like, obviously you have a full-time job, the Sens have a small staff up top, and it just seems that, I'm just kind of curious as to why you guys aren't involved in trades or player acquisition, because that seems like a significant chunk of the portfolio, and it's an important part of building a hockey club. So I'm just kind of curious as to why that doesn't happen.
Well, I'll tell you a story that I can share. So we and not in that area, I'm just avoiding that for now, but I was asked this year for the first time to kind of get involved around drafts. Okay, so there's a lot out there, and then I used some of my own kind of techniques I thought was interesting. There's an inside sort of approach, and we kind of looked at a way to blend this together. And for those who watched the draft, it was an exciting moment for me when we went to 22 to 26 and pick up 48, and then I was surprised when there was no graphics about analytics, but 4 or 5 picks later, Dubas does something about the same but a little bit worse, and all of a sudden everybody's talking about analytics. On the other side though, more seriously, it goes to my earlier comment, the joke about AGM. Inside hockey operations in every NHL team, we might be light for numbers, but those people know 600-800 players all the time, right? Like, if not more. And if there comes a time where it's a fit, that they want to bring me in, but the data that this community has out there, like, they don't need me to point them to the website. So if we're going to go, into the next level, like you're suggesting, if that opportunity came to me, I'd be interested in it, of course, but I'm not going to tell them, how to do that. I know it's a tough time the last week and a bit, but, there's a lot of smart people in there.
Yeah, just to build off that question, do you have a hand at all in like the capology side of things, or if not, is there someone on staff who is kind of akin to a capologist?
Well, we've never not been able to ice a full lineup because we messed that up. I know some teams have. So yes, we have very, very, a lot of attention paid to capology. And I know people talk about the floor and all this kind of stuff. We're not close to the floor. You're not going to have a team built out of entry-level contracts. But yes, they do obviously have, that's very tightly controlled. Because it's not just what we see, it's the AHL2 number of contracts. It's very complex. The CBA, if you've ever seen it, to understand what that's worth, if you really want to be inside, read it. I started reading it, and one of the guys in Hockey Ops said I was, a masochist. What are you doing? I was curious. Is there any inefficiencies we could exploit?
Yeah. If you're allowed to disclose it, what's the one decision in your time with the Senators that you disagree with on any level, that if there's time to use, how would you go back and change it?
I like the one, the last panel was, when was your proud moment versus, well, no, honestly, there's nothing, I'm not in the war room. I'd love to be. I like pressure. I think it would be exciting. I certainly wouldn't be talking about it for sure. But what I do isn't part of that, right? I don't know, like the Pittsburgh series was amazing for me, right? We were into the lineup matchup kind of stuff, seeing Sam Ventura, lift the cup and at the end of the year, and his sound, like I saw that on Twitter, and I'm like, my nemesis, right? Because we were that close, right? We had a lineup that was, overachieving in a lot of regards, but there was a lot of things going right for us. But, you know, if the coaches didn't put up the line I thought, based on what I sent, no, there was nothing that made me go, they don't know what they're doing. They do. Sorry, I don't want to sound like I'm preaching here, but you know what I mean? Like, seriously, if anybody spent 30 years or plus doing what some of these people do, yeah, there's going to be a variation. There's a distribution, we'll say, but for the most part, they know what they're doing, and often the decisions are based on things that right now we don't know mathematically.
Yeah, let's do one more.
I wonder if the teams at that level employ a dedicated sport team psychologist that helps handle the intangibles and maybe provide an...
Sorry, I'm going to pause for a second. Mark Crawford's calling me, but I'll talk to him later. It's kind of neat. Sorry, that was just kind of funny because I'm on silent, I was buzzing. Sorry, psychologist in-house?
Yes. So there is a brain of psychologist deals with sports and helping motivating players. And I wonder if the teams employ dedicated people to help the roster.
Yeah, so
try to figure out why the players, let's say, underperform. Maybe so sometimes it's a nagging shoulder, but sometimes it could be a nagging thought.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I understand. You know, I don't really know. I mean, obviously we have, it's interesting because at the Combine you get probably more access to players on that kind of stuff. You can kind of feel it out a bit more. But I know from Stefan Malejo was trying to get some work done to be able to test some of his stuff on resilience. The idea was they would have iPads and they would answer some questions that would give a sense of their mood for the day and try to track that like with us. But the NHLPA, as you can imagine, is very sensitive to people actually interacting in that way. And so most athletes will have their own sports psychologist. You probably noted that. I can't speak to if the team has a dedicated in that space. And I firmly believe that that's something that would probably be helpful, just from a mental health point of view. I mean, the pressure that those players, so I'm going to do one final little blurb here, if that's okay. It's funny when people come up to me and kind of go rail about the salaries that hockey players make. And the funny thing about sports is that we know the very tip of that distribution who's making the most. But we don't know in the IT industry or in manufacturing of cars what the top 0.01 or 001 of people are making. I promise you, it's probably more than these hockey players are. And their window for making money is much longer. And so these elite athletes, some of them, not all, but some of them, it's a lot of pressure their entire life. So I think it would be good for teams to figure out a way that where the NHLPA was comfortable with it, to have a more direct support. So in the government, we have a program for people, a hotline that they can just call at any point. And so I manage teams or teams of employees, right? So I got 40-some employees working with me, and the employee assistance program, like, yeah, when things get tough, and I'm a personal person, like I manage relationships, not files. And, when people are in a tough spot, like, I say to them, hey, call. But I don't know what the league has or the teams have, but I think that that's something that needs to be fleshed out and supported more, because it's becoming more and more apparent that it's tougher, because they're starting younger. I mean, my God, like, by the time they're 11 and 12, you're going to know if you're a pro, and if you're not there, you're somewhere else. Like, some of the books I read about the decisions going on for years, like, the month you're born in is such a big factor, because they're going to make a decision before some of these kids hit puberty fully. Like, so that's going to be stressful on a human being, to be told at some point, you're no good or you're good or whatever, and living that tryout after year after year after year, and making and getting cut and making like 82 public performance measurement opportunities every year. I mean, that's got to wear on even the most resilient people. So I think teams would do well to figure out how to support that better. Sorry, that's a long answer.
That's all right. Let's thank Elias one more time. Surely we got a couple of things we want to raffle off here, and then we'll